There's a new study out right now measuring physical activity and sedentary time in Canada, all the way from youth, all the way up to adults. And some of the news is going to be a little disappointing, to say the least. Bruno Costa is an assistant professor at McGill's Department of Kinesiology and Physical Education. He is on the line. Mr. Costa, this is pretty wide-ranging, so let's start first of all, because some of the news is really not that bad, if I can put it that way. This covers a period from 2022 to 2024. And you start with basically preschoolers, kids in 9, 10 years old. Actually, you start with kids 3 to 4 years old. So let's start with that cohort first and tell us what you found.
So basically, this new report coming from StatsCan showed that we have different levels of physical activity according to the age groups that are analyzed. And we have a big portion of young children being physically active or meeting the guidelines. But that drops with age and drops drastically when they become adolescents. This is very important, of course, and we have a long way to go in promoting more physically active health styles.
So I will go through some of this, but I did want to point out, so this is 2022 to 2024, so obviously we're going to have to talk at some point pandemic and how it plays into this. But from what I read, these rates have pretty much remained pretty much unchanged, right, since 2018 to 2019 when the last measures were collected?
Well, for adolescents, there was a big drop. So we had 36% of adolescents meeting the physical activity guidelines. And for that age group, that means 1 hour per day of at least moderate intensity physical activity. But in the latest report, we see that proportion is 21% instead of 36%. So it was already quite low and dropped even more. And this is even worse for girls, which, only 8% of them meet the physical activity guidelines. This is a pretty steep decrease in the subgroup that was already not very active to begin with.
So this is interesting. So I mentioned you start from 3 or 4, the StatsCan figures, right? And then by the time you get to youths, as you're describing now, age 12 to 17, they were less likely than any other age group to adhere to physical activity recommendations. And as you said, the numbers have gone down since the last survey. Why do we think specifically girls in age group as opposed to boys?
So this is a very complex question. This is an issue that it's not exclusive to Canada. We see very similar patterns in many countries across the globe. We had studies even before the pandemic, 2012, showing that 80% of adolescents do not meet physical activity guidelines, and this has been an issue in 2020, and it is an issue now. The difference between boys and girls really has a lot to do with how they, experience adolescence. There's implications on how they perceive their self-esteem, how they relate to each other in sports, and how the environments are built to promote physical activity. The responsibilities that they take and how, their time competes with other behaviors is a big issue. Nowadays, they become teens. There's an influence of peers in their social environment. It grows stronger than that of their parents. They become more autonomous, but at the same time, there's more responsibilities. They find their first jobs. There's a pressure to get into college. And sometimes that competes with opportunities for physical activity. So the interest in sports, active play, it lowers a lot in that particular age group.
And that would be one of the things I imagine between boys, young boys and young girls, because the boys are probably getting more involved in sports than the young girls are.
Yes, definitely. And it's an issue not only for sports, but, they have other opportunities to become physically active. So even when you think about, going to school by bike or walking or,
right.
Even going to other places to meet their friends, like libraries to do student work or school assignments, the odds are always higher for boys to do physical activity in those settings as well.
There's also a component in the study on sedentary time, right? We talk about screen time and everything else. What did it show?
So right now, adolescents are the most sedentary subgroup in Canada, and that's more than 10 hours of sedentary time a day. So this is a big result. It's a little bit hard to measure, but we see those trends increasing over time in different subgroups. This is an issue because sedentary time often displaces physical activity, and the number of activities we can do while sedentary are also varied. So if you think about leisure, 20, 30 years ago, we had televisions, and then we had, board games. Nowadays, with smartphones, tablets, there's just so many different activities that one can do while they're being sedentary. And we don't know the results of this. There's never been a generation that has been this sedentary when they were adolescents. But there is an issue because it's a risk factor, for cardiometabolic diseases later in life, and also mental health challenges. It's associated with stress, anxiety, depression, and risk of diabetes and hypertension too.
And obviously, there's a link between physical activity and obesity. We've known that for a while, so that's of concern, I guess, in this study too.
Yes, there is a risk, of course. Like the more sedentary you are and the less physical active you are at the same time, it has a direct effect on how many calories you burn. And oftenly, sedentary time is also associated with unhealthier diets. So if you spend more time watching TV or doing things like that, odds are you're going to snack more and eat more unhealthy food. So it piles up.
I brought up a couple of minutes ago the idea about the pandemic, which of course we always have to take into account when we see studies that go back at least 2 or 3 years. How does that factor into this? Do we know?
It is a little bit hard to answer that question because we don't have another pandemic to use as a reference. So it is possible that this generation lost a few opportunities to develop sports skills and connect with others, and their way of, relate to their peers, of doing things in their different spheres of life, including work and schoolwork, are more sedentary. For 1 year or maybe more, every assignment was online, classes were online, they didn't have the opportunity to engage in soccer, hockey, and those, in-person physical activities. So it's possible that the way they learn to leisurely connect to each other is online. So it is unclear if that's going to move forward, if it's going to track into adulthood and for the rest of their lives, or it's something that's going to return to pre-pandemic levels. But it's very hard to blame the pandemic of this because it could be a simple result of the way technology is evolving as well, because this is happening not only for adolescents, but with everyone.
So just as a final question, I realize this is all about statistics, and that's what we're finding out here in terms of numbers. Is there a recommendation here, by the way, for parents, for example, to somehow get their kids more active?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's many ways to get kids more active. We can be more active. Of course, we want leisure. You can, promote sports. You can promote active commuting. You can play, go hiking, bike with them places. But honestly speaking, if we want a definitive action towards this 21%, we definitely need a multi-utility approach because it is an issue. We need to make environments safe and available for them to engage in physical activity, and that includes experimenting different sports until they find something they like, playing with each other and feeling safe, not worry about, their safety, their body image, they can be themselves, right? It's a part of their identity.
All right. We will leave it at that. Mr. Costa, very much appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
The biggest songs in the world. You've heard them countless times. Now, learn the details of how they came to be. Join Ruby Carr for Encore, the stories behind the songs you love. New interviews and newly unearthed archive footage make for a fascinating weekly deep dive. Stream Encore, the stories behind the songs you love on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts.